Something very telling is happening around the Detroit Lions right now, and if you've been following the build-up to the 2026 NFL Draft closely, you can feel the shift. With less than 2 weeks to go, the noise is getting louder, the projections are tightening, and one pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. The overwhelming majority of analysts are pointing the Lions toward one specific direction in the first round, and it says everything about how this team is being reshaped. Out of 66 mock drafts analyzed, 62 have Detroit selecting an offensive lineman. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just lazy projecting either. It reflects a real concern and a real transition happening inside this roster. The offensive line, once the backbone of this team, is going through a significant transformation. With Taylor Decker no longer in the picture and Graham Glasgow also gone, the Lions are clearly entering a new phase up front. And here's where it gets interesting. There isn't just one name being consistently linked to Detroit. There are several. That tells you something else. The league itself is split on how this offensive line should be rebuilt, and maybe even how the Lions themselves are approaching it internally. Take Spencer Fano, for example. He's one of the most commonly mocked players to Detroit right now. What stands out about him isn't just where he played, right tackle at Utah, but his versatility. There's real discussion about whether he projects as a tackle or slides inside to guard or even center. And when you connect that to comments from Dan Campbell about potentially moving Penei Sewell to left tackle, suddenly Fano becomes more than just a plug-and-play option. He becomes a flexible piece in a bigger puzzle. Then you've got Monroe Freeling, another name that keeps popping up. This is where things start to lean toward upside and athleticism. Freeling's profile is elite in terms of physical traits, with a near-perfect relative athletic score. The Lions have always valued that kind of ceiling, especially when they believe they can develop it. The idea of pairing two highly athletic tackles on both ends of the line is something that could redefine the identity of this offense moving forward. And we can't ignore Caden Proctor. This is a different kind of projection, more of a traditional franchise left tackle build. Big, powerful, experienced, and already proven at a high level in college. He's the type of player you draft if you want a long-term answer protecting the blind side. But there's also nuance here. His size is both a strength and something that needs to be managed, and there's even flexibility in potentially moving him inside if needed. That kind of optionality matters. Now here's another layer that fans might not be fully considering. Not all projections are tackles. Vega Iwan, a guard, has also been linked to Detroit, and not just by anyone, by analysts with strong insider connections. That suggests there's at least some belief that the Lions could go against the grain and take the best player available, even if it's not at the most expected position. Iwan didn't allow a single sack and brings a physical, aggressive style that fits exactly what Dan Campbell looks for. But stepping back for a second, what does all of this really mean? It means the Lions are not just patching holes. They are rethinking the structure of their offensive line. Whether it's moving Sewell, bringing in a new left tackle, or reinforcing the interior, every option on the table points to one goal: restoring dominance up front. And yet, there's still a twist in the story. Even with all this focus on offensive linemen, there are quiet whispers about another need: edge rusher. The Lions still don't have a long-term reliable complement to Aiden Hutchinson. Names like Keldrick Falk and Akeem Messidor have come up, though far less frequently. Still, reports suggest the organization values both positions highly, and there's even a possibility that the first pick could go to the defensive line. So now you're looking at a front office that has two clear priorities, multiple viable options, and a draft board that doesn't seem to have a consensus answer. That's where things get unpredictable, because when a team is this flexible, when they have this many directions they can go, it only takes one unexpected move on draft night to completely change everything. And that's the real story here. The Lions are at a turning point, and the decision they make in the first round won't just fill a need. It's going to define the identity of this team moving forward. So let me ask you this. If you're in that draft room, knowing everything we just broke down, do you prioritize rebuilding the offensive line no matter what, or do you take the risk and go after a defensive playmaker instead? And that's exactly where the tension starts to build, because once you accept that both paths are real possibilities, you begin to understand just how strategic this decision has to be. This isn't just about picking a good player, it's about reading the board, understanding how the draft will fall, and anticipating what other teams are going to do before you're even on the clock. Think about this scenario for a second. If the Lions truly believe that Penei Sewell is moving back to left tackle, that immediately reshapes the urgency of the position. Now you're not just looking for any offensive lineman, you're specifically looking for someone who can step in on the right side or adapt quickly to wherever the need opens up. That's why prospects like Spencer Fano or even someone like Maxiheana Shore start to make more sense. They're not just talented, they're adaptable, and adaptability might be the most valuable trait for Detroit right now. But if the board doesn't fall the way they expect, that's where things can get aggressive. There are already projections suggesting the Lions could trade up to secure someone like Francis Mauigoa, and if that happens, it tells you everything. You're not just filling a hole, you're going after a cornerstone. That's the kind of move teams make when they've identified their guy and don't want to risk losing him. At the same time, there's another path that feels quieter but could be just as impactful. Let's say the Lions stay put and the top offensive tackles are taken earlier than expected. Now you're staring at a different kind of decision. Do you reach for need or do you pivot to value? That's where a player like Vega Iwan becomes extremely interesting again. He may not be the flashy pick fans expect, but if he's the best player available and he instantly upgrades your interior, that could have just as much impact on the offense as landing a tackle. And then there's the defensive side, which still feels like the wild card in all of this. The drop in mock projections for edge rushers doesn't necessarily mean the Lions are out on that position. It might actually mean they're being more discreet about it. We've seen this before with teams that don't telegraph their true intentions. If someone like Keldrick Falk is sitting there at pick 17 and the front office believes in his upside, that decision could come down to long-term vision over immediate need. Because let's be honest, the presence of Aiden Hutchinson changes the equation. When you already have a dominant piece on one side, finding the right complement isn't just about production, it's about fit, development, and timing. Falk, for example, is still developing, but his profile suggests he could grow into that role over time. That's a gamble, but it's the kind of calculated gamble teams make when they believe in their coaching staff. So now everything comes back to identity. Are the Lions doubling down on what made them strong, building through the offensive line, controlling the trenches, and protecting the offense? Or are they recognizing that to take the next step, they need more balance, more disruption on defense, and more pressure coming off the edge? And here's what makes this even more fascinating. There may not be a wrong answer. Each path has logic behind it. Each option connects to a bigger vision. But the margin for error is still there because this pick is going to influence not just this season, but the direction of the roster for years to come. That's why every report, every mock draft, every small hint coming out right now matters. The Lions are keeping their options open, and that usually means they're preparing for multiple scenarios. It also means that what we think is most likely might not be what actually happens on draft night. And when that moment comes, when the Lions are finally on the clock, everything we've talked about, the offensive line rebuild, the potential positional shifts, the defensive upside, it's all going to collide into one decision. Now it's on you. If the Lions have both options available at pick 17, a top offensive lineman and a high upside edge rusher, which direction are you going? And if you've been following everything closely, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and check out the video on your screen right now, because this conversation is only getting started. Because the truth is, what happens next won't just confirm a strategy, it's going to reveal what this front office truly believes about this roster. If they go offensive line, it's a statement that everything still runs through control, protection, and physical dominance. It means they believe fixing the trenches puts this team right back where it needs to be, competing at the highest level with stability and consistency. It also reinforces the idea that the Lions want to dictate games, not react to them, but if they pivot and take a defensive lineman, especially an edge rusher, then that signals something different. It says they're thinking about ceilings, about adding another impact player who can change games on the other side of the ball. It shows a willingness to evolve, to complement what they already have, instead of just reinforcing it. And sometimes those are the decisions that separate good teams from great ones. The ability to recognize when to stay the course and when to adjust. And that power becomes even more dangerous when you realize the Lions are not operating in a vacuum. Every team picking ahead of them is shaping the board, and one unexpected run at a position can completely flip Detroit's plan in seconds. Imagine a scenario where offensive tackles start flying off the board earlier than expected. Suddenly names like Monroe Freeling or Spencer Fano aren't even options anymore. Now the Lions are forced to either reach for the next tier or pivot entirely. That's where preparation separates good front offices from elite ones. You need to know exactly how far you're willing to go for a player and when to walk away. On the flip side, if that early run happens at another position, say quarterbacks or wide receivers, then value could fall right into Detroit's lap. A player they didn't expect to be there suddenly becomes available, and now the decision becomes even tougher. Do you stick to your original plan, or do you adjust on the fly and grab the unexpected talent? This is where Brad Holmes has built a reputation. He's not just reacting, he's anticipating. Every move, every scenario, every possibility is mapped out ahead of time, and that's why you keep hearing about how wide open their options are. It's not uncertainty, it's calculated flexibility. And let's not forget something else that's quietly part of this equation: development. The Lions have shown they trust their coaching staff to mold players over time. So when you hear about prospects who are raw or still developing, that might not scare this front office the way it scares others. In fact, it might be exactly what they're looking for. That's why a player like Keldrick Falk could be more appealing internally than people realize. He's not the finished product, but in the right system with the right coaching, he could become something much bigger. And if the Lions believe they can unlock that, then suddenly that pick makes a lot more sense. At the same time, safer prospects, players with higher floors, offer immediate stability. And after the changes this offensive line has gone through, there's a real argument for prioritizing reliability. Someone who can step in week one, handle the pressure, and keep the offense running smoothly. So now the decision becomes even more layered. It's not just offense versus defense. It's ceiling versus floor. It's immediate impact versus long-term upside. It's certainty versus projection. And when you break it down like that, you start to see why there's no clear consensus, even among analysts. Everyone is reading the same situation, but depending on what you value most, you end up in a completely different place. That's what makes this one of the most fascinating moments for the Lions in recent years. They're not desperate, they're not forced into one direction, they have options, and real ones. But with that comes pressure. Because when you have this much flexibility, you also have to get it right. And when that card is finally turned in, when the name is announced, we're all gonna look back at this moment and understand exactly what it meant. And when you zoom out even further, you start to realize that this isn't just about one pick. It's about the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. For the past few years, the Detroit Lions built their identity on a dominant offensive line. That